Good evening, and welcome to the meeting of the RSU 5 Board of Directors. Today is Wednesday, October 13th, 2021, and we are in the Freeport High School Library. And I am Beth Munson, the Vice Chair this morning. Our Chair, Michelle Richardson, is not able to be here tonight. And so it looks like we have nearly everybody here. We're missing Vali and, oh, there she comes, yay. Sorry. And our student representative, Brady, is not here yet either. So, but we will go ahead and get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so next on the agenda is a consideration of minutes. Do we have a consideration approval of the minutes of September 9th, 2021, as presented, barring any errors or omissions? Maddie, do you have an adjustment?
I'll just make the motion and then right?
Okay, all right, yeah. Maddie, go ahead. And second was Jen.
And I have an adjustment to suggest. So in number 10, about the board comments and committee reports, I provided an update, and the minutes say it's the FPAC Advisory Committee, but we now know it's not actually an advisory committee, it's just a committee. So I suggest that we strike the word advisory, so it just says FPAC Committee Update.
Okay, thank you. Any other adjustments, questions? Okay, we all in favor? Okay, thank you. Unanimous. So we have adjustments to the agenda.
We have one. I'd like to move 13 to right after 9B.
Okay. All right, and so then we're moving right on to good news and recognition. Again, the student representative is not here yet, so if he shows up, we will have them go. So we're going to move on to good news from Mass Landing School with Emily Grimm.
Good evening, and I do have some slides, so I don't know if if you're able to see the screen, that's great. Do you know the library code?
Yeah, I'm actually going to hardwire you.
Oh, even better.
Just so it doesn't drop out on us.
Thank you.
I didn't know if Dennis was going up here. I forgot you never took a new computer.
Yeah, I love the old one.
Give it a second.
Oh, it's going to leave us in great anticipation.
Did you turn it off and turn it on?
Really great anticipation.
Let me double check, make sure that's good there. Actually, I gotta reverse this action real quick. Which way do you want to use the Apple TV? So check out hardware. So That's interesting. It should work. He just reversed them. That should. Interesting.
Ta-da, perfect. Thank you so much. So I have the pleasure of getting to share good news about Mass Landing School. The first thing is we welcomed 29 new to Mass Landing School families this year. So over 10% of our student body is new to us. 22 of those are new to Freeport families. I think this is always exciting in part because we're pulling kids from all across the country, from literally the Pacific Coast and southern Florida, and it just offers kind of additional new fresh perspectives for our students here in Freeport. So that's been really exciting. Building on Julie Nickerson's presentation last week, I wanted to build on some of what she shared around student voice. And rather than be redundant, I'll talk to you about how this work grows 3 through 5, but I want to be really clear that their work at pre-K2 is really laying the foundation for it. And to me, I put the definition she had used, just this idea of students' values, opinions, and beliefs and perspectives leading both to their choice, but also creating opportunities for them to influence decision-making in the building. And I think of this as having 2 buckets. One is ensuring kids have opportunities to have their voice be part of what we do. But the other is giving kids lots of practice developing their voice, right? So if you have opportunities to do it without them having ever developed the skill, it's really hard for kids to take advantage of that. So I'll talk a little bit about both pieces of that. She alluded to this a lot last week, but there are a lot of places embedded within our day for that second piece, those embedded opportunities for practice. So it starts in morning meeting. Students greet each other every day. From simple skills, or that seem simple, but are not always, like making eye contact, speaking loudly and clearly, sharing things, asking questions that are relevant to the speaker, to some of the more academic work. So in math classrooms, you'll see kids sharing their thinking, building on one another's thinking, saying, I agree, I disagree. In writing, the progression of opinion writing particularly is a place that really lends itself to this. So in 3rd grade, kids as a whole classroom begin to deepen their voice in opinion writing as a class. So every year I get letters from 3rd grade classes, which is so fun. Everything from like, we need a pet day. That was last year's. This year I planted a little seed with our 2nd graders last year about a giant slip and slide on the hill, our sledding hill. So I anticipate that I'll get some opinion writing about a giant slip and slide, which will be amazing because it will happen if those 3rd graders write that letter. And then it builds. So it starts from things like that we might see as relatively small, to then in 4th grade, students start doing research around issues or topics that are important to them, like deforestation. And then in 5th grade, really thinking about how their writing is a way to work as an advocate in the world. And so then there are kids who write about how they should be allowed to play extreme sports, or about global warming. And really developing their ability to use writing as an extension of their voice. So those are some curricular ways. Another place is students do debate work as well in the literacy work that they're doing. So they might take a novel and say, is this character brave or weak? And then looking for evidence in a text and having flash debates with one another, where they start with, I take the position that. And the beauty of that work is every single student's doing it in partnerships. So there's no kind of sitting back in it. But again, opportunities for kids to practice that work in a structured environment with the intent that then they're building it in other authentic parts of their lives in the school day. So a few other places. So those are all the places kids practice it, but I wanted to also shine a light on what this looks like in our day-to-day. So we have what we call Mass Landing School values. They're on the left. Those are kids who are now in high school. Because those are the students, the year that they actually created these. So they had a representative from every class bring ideas from their class that then went to the grade level, that then came to this meeting in our conference room, which was actually one of my favorite moments I've ever had at Mass Landing, as kids were like crossing things off the list and facilitating this conversation to arrive at these 5 values. And that's one example of how kids are infusing the expectations that we have as a community. And they do this, Julie alluded to this last week, but they also do this at the classroom level. One of my favorite things about these values is kids have a lot of ownership for how we problem solve them. So last week, I actually had 2 examples in the last week that I was just like, oh, these are like perfect ways to see it. So on the left, this is a 4th grader, and she had been struggling with some peer issues. She had noticed that there was some unkindness amongst a group of friends. And so she came up with this idea of posters that she wanted to make for the school. And she set up a meeting with me, and she brought her poster. And she said, here's what I'm thinking. Here's the problem I'm seeing. And here's how I think we can solve it. And then she and I are meeting tomorrow to plan how she's going to explain to kids what the posters are about. So rather than just put them up, you know, my response to her is like, how do we take that a step further and help ensure that your idea really supports kids in being kind to one another? And to me, this is exactly what we want to inspire in kids, that they're taking it upon themselves to think about, how can I help better the community? The second piece, so this is a game called GYM Ball at recess. This is actually at Fall Fest, but very popular game if you've had a Mass Landing student. And yesterday, I happened to walk into a small group of kids at the end of the day, 5 boys who had noticed that there was some teasing during recess, and they were problem solving with a teacher around how to address it. And what was really beautiful about that moment is one of the solutions actually was adult facing. So they said, each one of them, the adult who's supervising needs to be listening more closely to what's happening in the game, and that would be helpful to us. To me, why I love it, why it kind of is goosebumpy to me, is because kids feel empowered to tell adults what we can do better, not just what they can do better themselves. So these are small examples, but these are from the last week. And to me, that's evidence of what we're trying to build in terms of students' comfort and involvement in the community. They're part of making the community a great place for kids to be. A couple other places you might see this. So students do a lot of self-directed goal setting and reflection on one another's work. So this is a student leaving feedback for another student's writing. So again, a place where student voice is part of what we do, but also where students are making decisions about what they're trying to work on and get better at. Student council has a representative in each grade level classroom. So on the left, so this is a 4th grader. It's hard to see, she's tiny. This is a 4th grader last week presenting to a 3rd grade classroom about the expectations for Fall Fest, which is a festival. We have these seasonal festivals that student council plans. One of the 3rd graders last week said it was the best day of her life, which made me really happy. It's a reminder that this is a big deal in 3rd grade. So student council representatives have the responsibility not only for planning these activities, but then also going and talking to classes about our expectations for how we engage in them. And then in the middle is one of our spirit days, also student council planned. So this was a beach theme in the middle of winter. I don't think the student wore his scuba mask for the whole day, but he was super excited to have it. And then on the right is one of the activities last week from Fall Fest. So student council picks all of those activities. So paper airplane, super popular. And just another example of where kids are having say over some of just like the fun culture and community building events that we do. And then our civil rights team also does a lot of this leadership work, both through education. So this is at an all-school assembly, obviously pre-COVID, but finding ways for our student council to continue to have voice, both in how we make our community a welcoming one, and also on providing education to the school community and giving kids a forum for talking about issues related to equity and inclusion in our school community. And this is one just other organic example. So this doesn't have to do with student council or civil rights team or a formal project, but this is Remote Control Vehicle Week last year. And this was just an idea. A kid came to me and said, like, I want Remote Control Vehicle Week. I said, okay, so let's talk about what that would look like and what the expectations were. And if we have a ramp and, you know, how big the area is. And so he and I partnered on coming up with the expectations, and he wrote those up and shared them with classes. And again, I think this is the kind, while small, like this idea that we want to inspire in kids that when they have an idea, they can bring it to fruition, and that they're confident enough to engage people who can help them with that, right? And so like in 5th grade, it might look like Remote Control Vehicle Week. As adults, we hope it looks like really informed civic action, right? So this is like where it starts, Remote Control Vehicle Week. One other just great piece of to me amazing news that I wanted to share on Friday. Our whole school district had the opportunity to engage and work with Lynn Lyons, who's on the bottom right corner, around work particularly relating to worry and anxiety with kids and supporting kids who are struggling with worry. But the presentation was much bigger than that. And there was a lot of positive feedbacks from staff as we reflected on ourselves, on our roles as parents and our roles as educators. But one of the things I was thinking about when I think about good news at Mass Landing is some of the things that are restarting, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But I wanted to ground them in this. So this was an early part of her presentation, also part of the parent presentation she did. And as I look down these critical cognitive skills, I have a lot of pride that these are things we create for kids. So opportunities to tolerate discomfort, to learn by doing, to problem solve, to be flexible. One of her great, just tuck in my back pocket ideas was debriefing with your kids every night or in the classroom every day. What was something that went unexpectedly today and how did you respond? And I share this kind of as front loading that I'm really excited that our third graders starting Friday are going to be doing Farm Fridays at Wolf Neck Farm for 6 weeks this fall and 6 weeks in the spring. We've changed our model as a result of the partnership that came out of last year. Rather than going in the spring for 1 week, we're doing a more distributed model to allow that work to be more embedded in the science curriculum and for kids to collect data and do research during their time there. Our fourth graders in 3 weeks are going on an overnight, so first time in 2 years at the ecology school. And then our plans are for kids, our fifth graders, to still be able to engage in Chewonki. And I say all that because to me, those experiences are all about these things. And so having these alongside kids who feel like they have voice and are empowered to use that voice, to me, is some of the greatest things we can do for kids. So any questions about good news before I transition? Awesome. People can come back to seats if that's more comfortable.
Are you talking about going right into
Am I next?
goal review? No, we have a couple of things before that, so you can sit down and take a little breather.
Awesome.
Thank you, though. And that was great. It's always wonderful to see the pictures of the kids and engaging. Okay, so after that, we have our first public comment. Looks as though there is no one here for that. So, okay. Reports from the superintendent? No? Okay. All right, Emily. I had to go through the motions.
That was a
right?
perfect amount of a breather.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to talk about last year's goals and outcomes alongside this year because I always think, my language with teachers is always there's nothing magic about 12 months. Some goals take less time, some more, and my hope is the work is always a continuation of what we've been doing. So to ground it a little bit in last year, our work really reflected the context we were in, which is hybrid learning. Thankfully, we're not in that context anymore. But the bulk of our work last year was really in thinking through prioritization. So thinking about the time we had kids in front of us, thinking about the time kids were working or practicing independently in other environments, be it in school or otherwise, and thinking about how we maximize that instructional time. And I think that work was beneficial more in math than in reading. And that was what we saw in the data, is that our kids, their growth really reflected a typical year of growth, which was a great point of celebration for us, and has had some implications for the way we think about prioritizing content going forward. So kind of one of those silver linings. We had a learning alongside that hybrid environment, which within our writing practice, especially as kids earlier in the year when we didn't have all kids back in a 5-day model, there was this temptation to make writing very assignment based. So kids would be in on a Monday, get some instruction, and then Tuesday you're going to go home and do X. And the challenge is that's really not a workshop model. It's not the curricular model we have, and it doesn't inspire a lot of agency on the part of students or a deep love for writing, really importantly, or a sense of purpose. So that's when you get kids who might say, when you're like, why are you writing this piece? They'll say, I'm writing it for you, right? I'm writing it for my teacher, rather than I'm writing this because I want to change people's minds about the fact that kids should be able to play Minecraft all day long, right? Or something like that. So we've taken that learning from last year really as a place to goal set in the coming year. And you'll see that in this year's goals, a few steps which involve moving away from kind of thinking of writing as assignments, revisiting the core tenets of a writer's workshop. So this is things like meaningful conferring work. That's when a teacher is sitting with a student and giving them feedback and thinking about how students are driving that process, right? So it might be the student identifying what their next step is rather than the teacher saying, you could do blank. Helping connect more to author's purpose, like why kids are writing what they're writing. And it shouldn't be for us, unless they're writing a letter to me about a giant slip and slide, and then it should be for me. And so our 5th grade team is doing a book study on this called When Writers Leave the Workshop. Many of our staff are doing professional goals around revision work, particularly in writing, and creating more robust opportunities for revision. So rather than like, this is I did it, it's done, versus like, how are we always growing as writers? And kind of almost like restarting is the wrong word, but having tighter fidelity to those core tenets of a writer's workshop. In reading, we ended the year last year with 60% of kids hitting the grade level benchmark, which was better than the previous year. The great news was we had a lot of kids come in below grade level as a result of that school closure the spring of the previous school year. And there were a lot of kids who came in below grade level and ended the year at grade level. That was great news. The challenges were kind of again in the same situation. So while 60% of our kids, this year's current 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, 60% of them were at grade level benchmark, the incoming 3rd, 4th, and 5th, just like almost 48% of them are at benchmark, so significantly lower. And so what we've tried to do early in the year is look at those kids, identify what places we think we can grow them efficiently as readers, and to get small group instruction going, as well as to use, you may recall, in 2 years ago, the budget cycle, we added a 0.2 of our literacy specialist with the hope of using her in a coaching capacity in the classroom. Last year, we ended up using her for RTI because of the needs. But this year, we have her in classroom supporting teachers with getting some of that small group work up and going so that we can help grow those readers that we feel this urgency about, particularly because of the impact of the last year and a half. And teams have been prioritizing time to do that work. So that gives you some context about our academic goal. From a social emotional place, you'll see that last year we focused a lot on putting more emphasis on our school values, which you saw up there, finding ways to infuse and celebrate those values on a daily basis in our school, refining some of our RTIB structures. And the great news is we saw a lot of growth among our students who get RTIB, which is to us communicates that supports in place help ensure those kids can access their academics even when they have behavioral needs or emotional regulation needs. And then we also worked last year, both Kelly Herzog, the school counselor at Moore Street, and Susan Albertini at Mass Landing, to create kind of a comprehensive K-5 school guidance curriculum that's grounded both in the professional organization ASCA standards as well as Teaching for Justice standards, which is formerly Teaching Tolerance, if you're familiar with that organization. And so the great news is going into this year, for the first time in my entire time at Mass Landing, we have weekly scheduled guidance to guarantee that all kids have access to that. It was more dependent on the teacher and the grade level schedule previously, and now we've just built it into the schedule because we feel it's critical that all kids have access to that content. And so that's a really exciting change in the year ahead. You'll see last year we also set a goal around our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. This is one of those areas that, to me, like, there's no magic about the 12 months. So it's work that was started last year and work that is continuing this year and work that we will be doing in perpetuity. But in addition to ensuring that kids have access to weekly guidance curriculum, we've been unpacking our units with the lens of equity, like thinking about who has access, how can we create greater access to the content. We have just started social studies work in a formal sense in the district, which will continue later this fall. But the great news is that work has already started on teams, in fact, last year. So a good example, when we got to our Freeport history unit last year, there was this clear there is like some clear absence here when we teach Freeport history as occurring with the arrival of settlers and just looking at it through the lens that's really accessible through the Freeport Historical Society, and trying to work with them to expand what that looks like. Same with teaching about Freeport shipbuilding history, right? It was another place where we're not teaching a complete story here. So while formal social studies work is exciting to look at it systematically, the great news is some of those conversations and work are already happening in the units that we teach kids. And then we've been having pockets of staff engaged in different pieces of work, be it book studies. Most recently, a team of us did a 2-day training that ended yesterday around courageous dialogue. And this is really building our capacity to lead conversations, not just with staff, but with kids as well. And how do we engage in those moments when there are things that are said that we feel like are not compatible with an inclusive community? How do we help create the conversations that hopefully lead for learning and growth in our community? So questions?
Maddie?
Not questions, just appreciation for everything, including the good news piece. I was reflecting on a meeting I was in recently, sort of a personal growth meeting where a lot of us adults were talking about how we didn't have a voice as kids. A lot of us come from that time of, children are meant to be seen and not heard. And it's just so exciting to me that the foundations are being laid in elementary education now for voice to be respected, not just because kids are finding their voice, but because they're in a setting where their friends are finding their voices, they listen, and we need more listening. So I'm excited about everything that you're sharing. Also, the Freeport Historical Society put out a really lovely statement on Indigenous Peoples Day, also acknowledging sort of this long period of, sort of thinking that local history began with the settlers. So I'm glad to know that you're a part of that conversation and looking earlier to understand more and be more inclusive of our long history, and just exciting things that you're doing at Mass Landing and throughout the district. So thank you.
Thank you.
Jen?
So I just want to say, with you and with Julie's presentation, I feel very much that you all kind of schooled us on what voice is. I know we asked for it, but I feel like you came back with so much more than we ever expected. So, and I said the same when Julie was here. It's it's exciting to think. I mean, I'd love to go back to school. Obviously, like Maddie said, we did not grow up in that time where voice was respected of kids. So I think everything you're doing is great. I did have, and you just commented on it, the training that you talked about, courageous conversations. Is that something that's available to sort of, I mean, I know you're not probably the person to answer this, but that seems like something that I've read a lot about, is that's where a lot of issue kind of lies, is with the ability to actually have the conversations when they come up and they're not planned and it's not scripted. So that training seems like a great training, and I just don't know, maybe Becky, you can expand on whether other teachers and staff are going to that same training.
Well, Emily can because she's part of that group. So go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, so every team, every school in the district had a team there. The largest was the high schools, because the high schools really using that as a model of those teachers are now going to be the leaders of smaller affinity groups at the high school. So their model is slightly different. We're weaving it in to some work we're already doing about developing our skill set for having really honest conversations with each other. But I think you're spot on that often, even a year and a half ago when I felt like, these topics were becoming more commonplace for discussion among staff, again and again, hearing this, sometimes I don't know what to say. And so building that skill set and knowing it's going to take some time and practice. One of the most effective things I think actually that came out of yesterday was talking about identifying times we messed up and having those stories so that we can create an environment where we get this is not going to be perfect work. But how can we lean on those to create some safety around this, and then building our skill set, a piece at a time, both with colleagues and with kids. So my sense from the groups participating is each school, the model looks slightly different, but taking that work back to support staff in the development of the same skills is the goal.
Vali.
Thank you, Emily. I echo both what Maddie said and what Jen said. Thank you. Great work. I had a question. You mentioned Lynn Lyon's presentation, and then you mentioned also that now we have a weekly scheduled guidance session for every student, which is awesome. I wanted to find out, do the kids learn about emotional regulation for themselves, even if they may not be RTIB students, in that guidance class? Because that is key. I mean, anxious kids, stressed out kids don't learn too well. And there's so much information out there about how to teach them how to regulate their emotions so they can calm themselves down and learn. Is that something that's happening?
Yeah, so there are a couple layers. I was about to say tiers, but it sounds like RTI, layers of what this work looks like. When I think about like the difference of schools now versus to when we were in schools, I think one of the biggest differences is students' access to information about how their body and brain works. And so that does exist for all kids universally in the guidance curriculum, and really looks at different, like kids being able to talk about your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex. Now, the level of depth kids get varies based on needs. So there's kind of this universal, like tier one, all kids are getting access to some of that content in the school guidance curriculum. But then we also have groups that do more intensive work. So for example, last week on Wednesday mornings, we have an executive functioning group that meets, and kids literally have a picture of a brain out in front of them and are talking about different pieces and what impacts, like when this happens. And Lynn talked about it last week as well. So I'd say the depth of information kids get looks slightly different based on the needs of the students, but that all students have access both to an understanding of how their body works. And even Lynn talked a lot last Friday about neuroplasticity and being like really forthright with kids that our brains are way more adaptable than we give them credit for. And then the other piece that's complementary to that is giving kids tools to self-regulate, right? Because knowing how your brain works is not sufficient. If it were, we would all be regulated all the time, and we're not. And so the other piece is that building the toolbox. So one of the tools I don't know if Julie talked about take a break spots, probably not last week, but part of responsive classroom, when we talk more about it, maybe that like every classroom also has a spot that's really noted for a self-regulation spot. And using things like breath work and counting backwards by threes or visioning, all of these things that adults we use in varying capacities, but building opportunities for kids to practice those regularly in their daily schooling.
That's great. And does that happen in the other schools too, or is this specific to Mass Landing?
It's a responsive classroom practice. I know it's consistent I can speak for Moore Street and Mass Landing because Julie and I work so closely together, but it's consistent in any classroom that kids are coming through. And Durham and Pownell also use responsive classroom.
Thank you.
Maddie.
You just reminded me in talking about the tools that kids have access to and talking about breath work. My kids always make fun of me because I'm always like, breathe, take a breath. And they always say, Mom, so dumb, Mom. And the first time I ever heard Lynn Lyon speak, and she said, breathing is fine, but breathing alone is not helpful. Like, because so often we're adults or kids are told, breathe to get rid of the problem. And she said the point is to normalize the problem.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to check back in with you about those tools, and are your teachers already, and even more so, are they integrating those ideas that the tools are meant to sort of make the uncomfortable situations, the new situations, the hard situations normal instead of like just breathe it and get rid of it?
Your question's well timed because I think if you had asked teachers a week ago, the answer would be different, right? So I think honestly, I'm like, look, yeah, Cynthia's like nodding away because we were right there. So that idea of saying to kids, of course, right now you feel like you want to throw up, you're about to present in front of the school board. Like, of course you feel that way, right? Is very different than like, oh, Maddie, what's the worst that can happen, right? Like they ask you a question you can't answer, right? And shifting our thinking. So I think that is shifting for teachers. I know a lot of teachers, I mean, we've had 2 school days since then, and I've had 3 different teachers approach me with like different questions about implications, right? Or like this idea of doing this disorder. When are we enabling something? Like, oh, you're not comfortable. I want to say coming to assembly, Cynthia, it's a bad example to give, but you're not comfortable doing that, like, let's find a way for you to avoid that. You don't like eating in the lunchroom, we'll find a separate space, and shifting our thinking. So I think to kind of like indirectly answer your question, teachers have varying levels of skill themselves, and know that as adults, like, these are also things as a lot of people in that audience are like, obviously, like, thinking about themselves as much as they're thinking about the kids they serve. And how do we talk about discomfort with kids? And to me, that is, like, I'll go on my soapbox, a huge reason that I am such a proponent of outdoor education, because I think it pushes kids to a place that normalizes discomfort. Because when you're sleeping in a tent and it's pouring rain, it's like, we embrace, this is hard right now. And look, like, we can do it. Nobody melted, right? So that was a really long-winded question, answer to your question.
Go ahead.
I'll be quick. I wanted to just provide my own example because right after I watched the parent presentation, literally, I closed the computer and my kid came downstairs frustrated with college application process stuff, significantly frustrated. And I was like, oh my God, I have a chance to put this to work. What am I supposed to do again? How do I? And I quickly, I was like, hold on. And I looked at my notes and I just said something that said, I did. I had notes. I looked at my notes. I was like, I just learned about this. And I said, I think everyone says that this is such a hard time, right? Apply for college is such a hard time. But I don't think people always talk about, like, why it's hard. I said, I bet everybody feels exactly how you feel. Like, this is normal. And literally, it was like I stuck a pin in the balloon. She just was, it was such a relief to her. And normally, I'm like the fix-it mom. I'm like it's okay, what's the worst that can happen? You got this, you're great. And that's, like, not helpful, Mom. But saying, this is normal was so helpful. And it was mind-blowing for me. It was so simple, but such a fundamental thing I don't think many adults are hardwired to do. Mm-hmm. So I'm thrilled with your answer that it felt timely and that everybody's sort of grappling with it. I think it's fine that we're grappling with it. And I'm happy that we're grappling with it instead of just moving past the learning day. And
yeah, and I think there's more. I mean, I'll be totally honest, there's more work to be done, right? And I know in our building, one of the things we've already talked about is creating some opportunities to dip back into the work, because there are also very different implications for a principal versus a school counselor versus a classroom teacher, and thinking, what is universal? What do we want? Like, that idea of, like, our closing circle prompt once a week is like, what didn't go as planned today, right? How did you deal with it, right? What was uncomfortable this morning? So I think its work will continue to cycle back to, but it feels like it has laid a really nice foundation in that everyone had access. It's rare, right, that everybody in the room is reflective of every building, every grade level, every role. So it feels like a really great foundation to build upon. Any other questions?
Oh, I guess. Thank you very much, Emily. Okay, so we're going to move on to 9B, which is the capital improvement plan and goal review with Dennis Swillett.
I was really nervous until Emily came up, and what's the worst that can happen? Right? Well, hello. It's that time of the year again. I wanted to talk about the goals from the last year, and like Emily did, and move forward with the new goals this year. Goal number 4 was to ensure that staff and students have quality facilities. Part of the way we achieved that goal was that we made sure that we had ample supplies to clean the school. We made sure that we had sanitizer, we had masks, and I always felt that we were ahead of the group, because they were running out of this stuff and we had a whole trailer full. So we were feeling pretty good. And we installed 2 portable classrooms. That was a feat, but we managed to do that. And my crew and we assisted in making some outdoor learning spaces. These are all things that helped us ensure quality facilities. I think we did a fine job there. In transportation, one of the goals is to support participation in curricular and extracurricular programs. Well, we bought 4 vans. We bought 4 vans because we needed to move so many students during COVID. Our schedules didn't always match MVR 10. People wanted to go to Wolf's Neck Farm. We had early release. We managed to work through every one of those things with very little problems. Our transportation department did a fine job, and they continue to do a fine job. We completed an energy audit. It was part of the sustainability committee. We talked about having an energy audit. We did that. We had a ventilation study in all of our schools. We entered into that with mechanical services. We ensured that we have adequate ventilation in all our schools. Diversity training. We did the diversity training school-wide with everybody. And then in June, we actually did our own at a bus driver custodian meeting. We had somebody come in and speak, and we had breakout groups, and we talked about inclusion, diversity. We talked about everything. And I think everybody really enjoyed that. I mean, that was a learning process for so many people. But we're also going to do, in November, we're going to team up with nutrition again and do some more training in that nature, and try to do something, outside of a classroom, more towards the way we are. We're not in the classroom, so we're trying to focus on that. We talked about that. So that's where we're going moving forward. But moving forward with the goals, like I said, November we're doing the meeting with diversity, inclusion, equity, and to continue with the energy audit, we'll probably tackle lighting next. We've just finished, we're 95% finished on the ventilation project that we did at Moore Street School, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. And we're going to look at water conservation probably, kind of the low-hanging fruit next. We have 2 capital budget projects this year. The roof at Mass Landing, that's 95% complete. I talked to them today. They feel that they'll be done by the end of next week, which is great. They've worked all of October and some of September with very little interruption at Mass Landing. I'm sure there was some loud moments, but they tried to save that kind of work for Saturdays and the holidays that we had. So I think they've done a pretty good job. They're almost done, so we're getting there. And that'll be good for 30 years, so that's a positive. Moore Street ventilation project, we're about 90% done there. All the classrooms are finished. We have 1 heat ventilation unit. It's in a ceiling over a girls' bathroom in the nurses' station that needs to be replaced. And with the supply chain the way it is today, it was hard to get that unit. We received that unit really late in August, and it takes about 2 weeks to put in, so we couldn't tackle it then. We have a plan to tackle it right after school gets out in June. But that's not to say that we haven't reached our goal of quality of today's standards in Moore Street School in every area of that school. We reached the ASHRAE standard. It's a 62.1 2019 standard. We've reached that with every room. So I thought that was a really big deal. Even though we still have that 1 old unit, we took some of the air off some of the rooms off that was supplying off, and put it on a new unit. And so that unit is still capable of putting out that kind of ventilation. So That's what we've been doing in our capital budget. I know you have the list of the 5-year plan from the packet, and I didn't know if you had any questions moving forward with the next year's capital. It's quite lengthy.
Vali?
Thank you, Dennis.
Yep.
I'm curious to know, on your goal about transportation, we talked at the Sustainability Committee about trying to make our fleet more green, and you
Right.
have purchased a compressed gas, natural gas bus.
No, it's a propane bus.
Oh, propane
Yeah.
bus, okay. That worked really well in the winter.
It did. It actually performed pretty well.
Yeah, so is there any way that we can continue to move in that direction to either have more propane buses, or even now with the new legislation, hopefully getting enough funds to consider electrifying our bus fleet? And the same for the vans. We
Right.
just bought 4 of those. Are those hybrid? Are those super efficient? Are we
Yeah, they're energy efficient vans, but they're not hybrid at all. I've looked into the electric buses. I don't think we're ready to go there yet, but I'm not ruling it out completely. There are grants out there, and I was thinking about joining up with a group that is writing a grant to replace 2 electric bus. But our fleet's pretty new now, so it's hard to get the grant if you don't have a bus that's 2006 and older. So, but I do enjoy the propane bus a lot. So I haven't ruled that out yet. We'll go into the bid specs when we do the buses, and I'll bring that forward. See
Yeah.
where we are with that.
That would be great, because you've done such a great job doing energy audits for all the buildings and all the other structures. And I feel as though the transportation is the one where we can make
Right.
more ground in the future by considering buying all kinds of equipment and machinery that,
Yeah.
if it's available in an electric version, then get the electric version, or the hybrid, or
The electric
the
version's
trucks
like
and the
$400,000 though, so I'm a little bit gun shy of going there unless there's some big grants when you could buy a fairly new bus. It's pretty energy efficient for about 95. So, and it's only 110. I'm not saying only 110. That's a lot of money, but for a
Yeah.
propane bus,
yeah.
so it's a little bit more palatable to go that direction.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, any of your vehicles.
Yeah,
as,
we
as
always.
they come up for replacement, it's something to consider, because I think
Yeah.
we all value and
There's a
would
lot
support.
going on in that department with the state, the transportation people at the state. They send out a lot of stuff, and they're going to have a lot of meetings coming up when you can join in on a webinar and see what's going on, the latest stuff.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jeremy?
Thank you, Dennis, as always. Just amazing how well organized the plan is, and you follow through on it every year. It's very cool to see.
It's my job.
Yeah. You do it.
My boss doesn't like it if I don't follow through.
Well,
Then I'm really
Thank you,
worried.
Becky, then.
Matter of fact, she may have alluded to the fact that we better not run out of hand sanitizer.
So, you got a truck. So, just 2 questions. First, on the Moore Street ventilation, have you gotten any feedback, positive or negative, on if the teachers feel it's made a change there? Or?
Actually, yes, I've heard that the building feels better to everybody. It's still fairly new. We're still getting into the adjustment phase. I still haven't got access to it, which is fine. They're still building a lot of the graphics to go with that. I know that we had a little bit of growing pains, and these shoulder months are really tough. One night it's 30, and the next night it's like tonight 55. So it's hard to regulate the building. It's so big that you have a thermal mass, and you have to cool it off or heat it up, and so. But yeah, no, I've heard good things. I've had some input on what they want, and I've brought it to mechanical services main controls. Like teachers would like the ability to shut off their fan if they need to. I don't think that's a good idea. That's not the idea of it. But they would like to be able to slow it down so it's not as loud when they're doing certain things. And, we're working on that piece now. But all in all, we know we're getting good. We're meeting the standard of today, which is a big deal.
Cool. And a little bit tongue in cheek, but can I loan you a grease gun for Craig's brakes on the Gator?
Yeah.
'Cause,
It's not his Gator, but he thinks it is.
Maura?
Just to follow up on Valley's point about the electric buses, maybe that would be a good opportunity for the Sustainability Committee to get in touch with our legislators, because I know they're always looking for ideas from us of things
Yeah.
we need. So maybe there could be state funding or something like that.
Yeah, they're working on state funding right now. They're asking for everybody to submit, and that's what we're gonna do. So they're active in it. It's not a process that goes really fast. So Mount Desert Island's the only one right now in the state that has an electric bus. So, it's risky to be the first one, but I guess I haven't had any feedback from them at all, but I will check.
Jen?
Dennis, I just feel like we haven't seen you for so long because of the pandemic and everything, and I just want to say.
Well, if you see a bus going by in Durham, just
I
wave.
know, I always wave to them.
It's
but
probably me.
Yeah. I just want to say, I don't know how outside of all the cleaning you guys had to do and all the issues with buses during the pandemic that you were able to do anything else. But I think that, it's a testament to your department that,
Right.
Parents, all the feedback we've gotten from parents was that, they felt that the RSU 5 did a really good job, I think, of handling everything during the pandemic. And I think that has a lot to do with you and your bus drivers and your maintenance people and the
Right.
custodians. So
It's
thank
all
you.
about our team. Our team is fantastic.
Yeah,
And they really care about what they do.
absolutely. It's very
Yeah.
appreciated.
Thank you. I'll pass that on.
Susanna?
Yeah, I'll second that from Jan about congrats to your team and thank you,
Thank you.
for all of that. Have a quick question referring back to what you had mentioned to Volley in her response to her question. You had mentioned with the legislative webinars about electrifying fleets and whatnot. Are those something that are open or are they?
I don't know.
Okay.
I know they're fairly new, and then I think they're not from the legislature. They're from the transportation department
Right,
at the DOE.
okay.
But I don't know.
If-
I'm sorry, I don't.
Yeah, no. If you hear of something, would you be willing to share that around? Because
Sure, I can share it
interesting.
with you on your email.
Brilliant.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Dennis.
Sure.
Anybody else? Okay,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Dennis. Okay, so Craig, we moved you up.
Excellent.
Okay, good.
Excellent.
You came in just in time. Yeah, we moved you to a 9C we created for you.
So I'm here to talk about winter competition cheering, also associated with basketball cheering. Last competition season, we competed in the state championship with 6 cheerleaders, and talked to the coach after that season and again when the football cheering season approached, and we were concerned with the number of cheerleaders that we may have. So I reached out to Brunswick and Mount Ararat. They both lost their coaches just because they had to move on and they weren't able to come back. So they are both without coaches. They also anticipate anywhere from 5 to 7 cheerleaders coming out for their teams. So the three of us met, the 3 ADs met a couple weeks ago and kind of brainstormed what it might look like. So I'm here to ask for a 3-school cooperative competitive cheering team with Freeport being the host school and Brunswick and Mount Ararat being the sending school. We have a coach, and she's very good. She would be the head coach. Brunswick has an applicant who probably would be a good candidate for an assistant coach. and Mount Ararat hasn't even advertised yet, and I don't think they're going to, based on, I think Brunswick is at their school board meeting tonight, and Mount Ararat is going very soon. You can have 22 cheerleaders on the floor competing in a state championship event. So if we have more than 22, we would have alternates because you're not allowed to cut. So we would have alternates. We talked a little bit about practice, some of the logistics. We practice in the cafeteria with 3 or 4 mats. I think there's 7 for competition. And when they want to do stunts, they move into the band room with 3 mats, maybe 4. At Mount Ararat, in their new facility, they have an auxiliary gym where the wrestling team practices and the cheerleading team practices. So the cheerleaders can actually have all 7 mats for every practice and do the stunts at Mount Ararat. At Brunswick, their practice situation is not as good as the two of us. So we talked about practice, where it might be, what it might look like, and certainly Mount Ararat's facility is the best facility. One of the girls, so I went into our fall cheering practice just last week and talked to the girls and answered any questions that they have. And one girl from Durham was concerned about getting rides to Mount Ararat. And I said, well, where do you live? And she says, well, I live in Durham, close to the Lisbon line. And I said, well, you're probably closer to Mount Ararat than you are to Freeport. Our coach can't practice until 5:30 at night because of her job, and that works well at either our facility or Mount Ararat's facility. When I met with our fall cheerleaders, of which there's probably 9 or 10, only 2 of them right now are considering cheering for the winter team because the others do, the other fall cheerleaders do a winter sport other than cheering. All of the competitors, all of the cheerleaders would be on their own to get a ride to practice, as is with all of our other co-ops. They have to find a ride to either either Mount Ararat here for practice. That would be true for the Brunswick cheerleaders and the Mount Ararat cheerleaders. We talked about busing to their events. Whoever has a driver is going to bus. They probably have 4 to 5 competitions a year. The state championship, the Western Maine Conference championship, and then 3 others that are put on by Cheer for the Heart and those types of things. And most of those are on Saturdays where busing is a little bit more readily available as far as drivers go. But the thought was between the 3 of us, one of us would be able to come up with a driver and a bus. We talked about uniforms. At first we said, well, we'll just have them all wear their own uniform. And then the more we talked about that, it really wouldn't look like a team, and the lines and the cut and the colors and the stripes, when they're out there moving in sync, they wouldn't be in sync because the uniforms are all different. Our coach thinks that we may have enough Freeport uniforms to outfit everybody who shows up. Brunswick thought they might as well. The other thing we talked about was we don't know how long this will be. It's a 2-year cycle. The 3 of us thought that we might be able to find some money to buy something really inexpensive, maybe black as the base color, and then put the orange for Brunswick, the maroon and white for us, and the red and blue somehow make it work with each of the names, or that's what most co-ops do. But that's we're still in the early stages. We haven't even got the total number of uniforms that we have or that Brunswick has. I'm trying to think. I think that's all I have, unless you have other questions.
Polly?
Thank you, Greg. Question of clarification. This would be only for winter cheering, right? Not for fall.
Right, because we have our own fall. We have 9 or 10 girls cheering for football. This would be the winter competition team.
Okay.
There used to be a requirement from the MPA that the winter cheerleaders had to cheer at basketball games for a certain number of games. cheering is evolving, and it's its own sport. It's its own competitive nature, and the NPA now no longer has any rule or recommendation. It's up to each school. We thought it would be nice because Brunswick, Mount Ararat, and Freeport in this upcoming basketball season, we all play each other. So we thought it would be nice if they went to one home game in each of the buildings and they could cheer for both teams at the same time.
Thank you. I have two more questions. One is, do Brunswick and Mount Ararat contribute monetarily in any way, since it's our coach who's training everyone, and possibly our space that will be used for practicing? And then the other question is, are our cheerleaders and our coach supportive of this arrangement?
Yes, the coach is ecstatic because she wasn't, we're concerned that we won't have enough.
Right.
We did it with 6 last year, but it's, if you've ever gone to one of those competitions or seen them, there are schools that trot out 20 kids, and it's impressive looking when they're all doing the exact same thing. And so she was concerned, and she's now really happy that she may have the biggest team she's ever had, and she's really looking forward to it. The 2 girls who raised their hand that said they would, there's a third that's kind of on the fence. They're real excited. They weren't until I came to them. The coach had said to them that this is what we're looking to do, and they asked her all kinds of questions. And that's what the 3 of us, the 3 ADs, talked about. What does the logistics look like? So when I went to them and told them about where practice was going to be, what the uniforms might be, what I think that put them at ease a little bit.
Thank you. And what about the financial contribution? Is there anything like that happening with cooperatives? I remember we paid Yarmouth for a portion of their coach when we were sending our team to practice with them. So does that happen?
So for ice hockey, when we co-op with Yarmouth for girls ice hockey, we pay, don't quote me on this, $750 per student, and that goes to ice time, because ice time is, I don't even know what it is. It's $300 an hour or something like that. We don't contribute to the ice hockey coach. Our money pretty much goes to the ice time. The same with the boys. When we do the co-op skiing, Brunswick does not help us with the coach. They pay, because we have to pay for the coach whether the Brunswick kids are with us or not. But Brunswick does pay for their own kids' ski tickets and the cost of each kid to ski.
So in this case, there wouldn't be anything like that?
We haven't really discussed that. There certainly could be, but we haven't discussed it. If Brunswick is going to come up with an assistant coach, then I think, Brunswick, they're already, going to be, part of that, so.
Jen?
Thanks, Greg. I just want to say I really appreciate, putting in the effort for the fact that, that you're looking at it and looking at problem solving the situation when it really, right now looks at it only kind of affects a few kids, which I think is, says a lot about how we look at programs, and that, rather than cutting something or, having it, be, a team of 5 or something like that, which isn't as great for those of an experience for those girls. Like, to be part of that bigger team is, I think, a gift to them. So I appreciate that. I totally support it. I mean, the only thing I can think of with Maddie's question, with Volley's question, is that I don't know if they go to competitions and they have to pay a fee or something, but that might be something they'd pay themselves, I'm guessing.
No, that's, the school does, and we did talk about sharing the cost of those entry fees. Yep, I'm glad you brought that up.
Maddie?
I'm hugely supportive of this idea. I think it sounds great. It sounds like it will further the opportunity for our kids who are interested in cheer. And I just wanted to make the comment, just because I think it's important for all of us to hear this. I don't mean to call anyone out, because I certainly make this some assumptions, but cheer is a gender neutral sport. So we've had young boys on our teams before, and hopefully we'll have more. So I just think it's important that we be thoughtful about that when we talk about cheer.
Susanna?
Thank you. And I had a question that was similar to Vali's, and so maybe you've answered this sufficiently. But Vali's question about whether this is the winter team only, and just wondering with Brunswick and Mount Ararat not having coaches, if this is something that, if it goes well, would this be something we'd consider for the fall? Noting that you also mentioned looking at some of the schools where there are 20 kids on the team on the floor at a time, and that in the fall we've had more, but it's still, 9 or so.
Right. So the crest.
Question is, if this goes well, is it something that we'd consider bringing into the fall?
Right. So
the co-op.
So the request right now is for winter competition cheering only. If that goes well, we certainly might expand that to the fall as well. The fall is a little bit different because you're not competing. You're cheering for the football team, and for we could go to each school, like we're going to do in basketball, but in basketball there's 18 games and we're going to cheer in each gym once because both of the teams are playing. We don't play Brunswick in football. We don't play Mount Ararat in football. So, to bring in Mount Ararat kids and Brunswick kids to cheer for our football team, maybe, but that's it. It's a different dynamic with the fall.
Okay, yeah, I didn't realize that it wasn't a competition season in the fall. So,
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Jill?
Could you just clarify, when you were talking about the facility space, Freeport versus Mount Ararat, is the reality the Mount Ararat space, the girls wouldn't have to roll up the mats and they have more space, or is it the mats, like they're going to have to, because they were sharing with wrestling?
Yeah, no, the wrestling mats are different than
They're
the
different
cheering
mats.
mats. So the wrestlers will put the mats out, take them up. Cheerleaders put them out, take them up.
Okay, and so is the Mount Ararat facility, for the numbers you're thinking, a better spot, or are they going to be able to go to both for practice?
So it's actually a gymnasium that they're practicing. It's an auxiliary gymnasium. It might not be as big as where they play basketball, where the bleachers are. I don't think there are bleachers in this auxiliary gym. It's more of a practice gym. So they can put out all 7 mats every practice, whereas here in the cafeteria, I think the most we can put out is 4. And I think in the band room, the most we can put out is 3. It could be 4 in the band room, but it's pretty squeezed in there. And they have to, not only do they move the cafeteria tables, they have to put them back and the whole 9 yards.
So it's safe to say maybe Mount Ararat would host. We have a coach. Brunswick has an assistant coach. So in the wash, everybody's sharing something.
Yep, exactly.
I guess my only one concern was you said that one person had a concern about getting a ride to the school, and I think when the practice is at Freeport, they've come to school here, and I understand that it's at 5:30 at night, but if a parent's working and the kid is got to just stay in town and then was planning on being right here for practice, that could be difficult. But after you talked to the kids, you thought that
the student who said she had a difficult time getting a ride was no matter where it was.
No matter where it was.
Yeah,
Okay.
and when I said, when she told me she lived on the the Lisbon line, it might even be closer to where she lives in here, so it might be easier.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to
Yeah.
just touch on that a little bit. That was the only thing that kind of seemed, because that seems, there's a lot of changes, obviously, going from your own team to being a co-op, but that seemed to be one of the biggest ones for me. So does anybody have anything else? Okay. So we can have a vote then, right? Okay. So do I have a motion for consideration and approval to authorize a winter cheering competition co-op team for a 2-year cycle? Laura, Maddie? Okay. And all those in favor? Any opposed? Nope. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Craig, can I, sorry, I should have asked this before, it wouldn't have changed my vote, but will the team, with this approval, will they be eligible to compete this year with the quick turnaround?
Oh, yeah, yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. We are back. We don't have anything for personnel and public comments. Oh, whoops. Oh, I discussed that. Okay, sorry. Thank you. I jumped ahead. We have to go back around. I know. Okay, so we're going to jump back in the agenda. I apologize to number 12, and we're going to unfinished business discussion on updated proposal resolutions for the MSBA Delegate Assembly. And I asked Maura if she wouldn't mind just highlighting a few of the changes from the last time we looked at it to what it is today.
Sure. So there weren't a lot of really substantive changes. I do have a document that shows the changes that were made. The one that you have, I think, just has it is an updated version, so it might be a little harder to tell comparing them. So if folks had any particular one they wanted me to go over, I'm happy to do that. I thought I would go over the ones where we had a no vote and tell you all, can you hear me okay? Okay. And tell you all what changes they made there to see if maybe that changed our mind to sway it to a yes vote. So the first of those being that first one on student absenteeism. So a couple of other folks said they didn't like some of the specificity in it, similar to how we didn't like the mentoring, counseling, and tutoring. So they actually crossed it out after school-based supports and just put multiple pathway programs for at-risk students without having that specific there. The 95% is in there, and they said that that's a DOE requirement, so they really kind of piggybacking on DOE, making that as a target for student attendance. So that remains, and I know that was one of the board's other concerns, that that was like specifically in there. And then the last part about communication, they inserted the word improved. So that part about communicating with DHHS, MSBA urges proactive efforts for improved communication. And they said that that really came out of some of the child deaths that occurred, and having school being a place where like you'd see some red flags that something is going on at home. So that was the specific reasoning behind adding the piece about communication with DHHS. And I think that's it for that one. Did the board want to keep going, or should we stop and give like a straw poll on that one?
Anybody have any thoughts on that they want to share?
Would that sway anyone's votes to vote yes or no on that one?
I think we were a no on that one before, right? And then right, yeah. Oh, that's right. Sorry.
Oh, right. Yes. Oh, could you go over should we go over what's in the packet? Sorry, I should have done that at the outset. So the first one is the new revisions, right? And then what previously existed, and then our votes on it is behind that.
If I'm remembering correctly, the discussion was around the contacting the DHHS or the 95%, and I'm not sure because of those things didn't change. Do people have thoughts on that? Are we still a no, or does anybody? Jen?
I think the fact that the 95% comes from the DOE, I would say that that would be something to accept. And I see the point of what Maura was saying involving DHHS because of the, few things that have happened in the past. But I'm comfortable with it, but if people still are uncomfortable with that DHS or DHHS, I could understand that, but I feel okay about it.
Does anybody else have any thoughts? Maddie?
Well, I noticed for all of these, they added a rationale, which was our big feedback, is that we're like, why is this in here? And so, but I just don't understand. I don't understand the sentence. Maybe I'm just thick. It's at the, yeah, it does. It's at the top of page 4. There's an added rationale. If anyone understands and can clarify.
Well, I think the first part that is struck out included teacher and student absenteeism. And so now they're just changing it to the student absenteeism. So they're explaining why they removed the teacher absentee.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So they're separating out teacher absence, which is the administration's job, and student absence, which is the school
Right,
board's
right.
responsibility. Okay.
So, and that wasn't really what any of us had an issue with, I think. So it's just whether or not we still want to be a no on that, or I don't know what people think here. If you want. Okay, we'll just do a quick straw poll. If people are fine with that still being a no, well, all in favor of it being a no, you can show me. Okay. Okay. Okay, so all in favor of it being a yes? Okay, Maddie, go ahead.
I'd like to hear from Becky. Sorry. I mean, I feel like you probably speak this language a lot better than any of us.
Well, I think it's a tricky one right now because I can't tell you how many times we're calling our parents right now and saying, pick your kid up, keep them home. So if we weren't in COVID, I would be probably 200% in support of this. But right now in COVID, we're saying if your kids are at all symptomatic, please keep them home. And so when you think of 95%, that's going to be, 8 days or I don't know, somewhere around there. And, it's very possible right now that a lot of our kids are not going to hit that 95% mark. So this is why I can see why you're split, and some of you aren't even raising your hand, like I don't even know what I think, because, I'm kind of with you on that one. So, I mean, normally we know that student attendance is so needed in order for success in school, right? And the whole anxiety thing with Lynn Lyons, and that's huge, right? That kids staying home because they're anxious and have fears about going to school. And so I understand the intent here, but if we're talking about during COVID times, I have a hard time stressing 95% because it's going counter to what I'm saying in my weekly letters. So I don't think that probably helps you.
Maddie.
It helps me a lot because, I mean, right now it's COVID, and it could be something else, and I don't know, I guess sometimes I feel like our zeal to legislate things doesn't take enough local circumstance into consideration and doesn't trust local administration to do what's right. And I can't imagine an administration that would be fine with kids just not showing up. Just who cares? Fine, they're fine. So I don't know. I don't think it's just. I don't know. I guess I would. Yeah, I don't know why we need legislation. I don't know.
Jen?
So I don't know if this is even possible. Would that be a way to go? Is that we support it, but not this year? Like, this doesn't seem to be the time to do something like that. I mean, that would be a no vote, obviously, but with the rationale from us that we don't, it's not necessarily that we don't support the vision, but during this time, we don't feel like it's the appropriate time to put this into legislation.
Susanna?
I mean, similar to what Jen's saying, because I don't support it. If I have to go yes or no, I'm a no. But I think there's the nuances that it's missing, and that there's a big difference between somebody being symptomatic for COVID than going on vacation. And, a family vacation for 2 weeks is going to take the kid out of that 95%. And that's to me completely different. And I think that's sort of, I feel like that's sort of more of what the bill is trying to get to. The wording is, when at all possible, we want kids in school. We don't want them not attending. But that's assuming that everything else is normal, that they otherwise would be in school. So.
Mara?
So we can put forward an amendment, though they're doing the process a little bit differently this year. They're having folks send in proposed amendments in advance, and you can also propose an amendment on the floor. So if, and we can also just vote no. So I guess those are our options.
Polly?
So clarification, this is for absences that are not justified? Or total number of absences?
It doesn't clarify. It just says having all students be in attendance at least 95% of their year.
Because that's another issue that I take with this. There are many, many educational opportunities for children outside of the school. So if a parent wants to take their student so that they can have hands-on learning somewhere, and the principal says that's a great opportunity, you should go for it, then that doesn't really jive with the way this is written. So I have that issue with this too.
Okay, so I'm feeling like it's a no, unless anybody else. Okay, all right, good. We'll stay with that as a no then.
Sorry, my microphone wasn't on. We are also a no on 2.b.1.c, curriculum policy. So they did clarify this one. So they changed it to, instead of include, I think before it was include in-person, remote, and regional collaborative learning opportunities. And instead it says these policies should, as much as possible and as appropriate, include plans for in-person, remote, and or regional collaborative learning opportunities, keeping in mind disabilities and health concerns of all students to ensure inclusiveness of all instruction.
I think on the first one, it didn't say remote. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
Originally it did say remote,
It
and I
did?
think that's why.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, I had a
and
note wrong. Sorry.
I think that was what we had an issue with, that it had remote.
I knew there was something with remote. That was what it was. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it wasn't their intention to have districts have a permanent remote option, so they clarified and then put the and or in there to hopefully address that.
So really adding the and or is like the kind of the big change with that to
adding the and or and making it more about inclusion and opportunities for students.
And so we voted no on the first time because of the remote and it didn't have the and or. So, okay.
That's
So how do people feel? Vali?
So I have a question about the alternative to the remote, which is a collaborative learning opportunity. Are these opportunities that districts have readily available access to? What are we talking about? Are we
Like Region 10 would be one.
right? But does every district have
Yeah,
something like that?
I think they do.
Okay.
Virtual,
It-
virtual
it-
high school.
Yes.
Like
Okay.
virtual high school.
Or AP for all, something
Okay.
like that.
So this wouldn't require districts to embark on any new expensive collaboration or initiative or anything like that?
I think that with the addition of the and or, it really leaves that open to districts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Jen?
So I think in reading the rationale, it actually supports me continuing to want to vote no, because the last sentence, this is both true during, similar to the pandemic, as well as in more typical times, which I feel leaves really an open door for that remote. So I think that's still an issue, especially that their rationale is the value of in-person and remote learning. I just think, I think it was Jill that just commented on there are already opportunities. And our students here already have opportunities to participate in, virtual academies. So I think this does sort of allude to the possibility of down the road it being something that will be required, which I feel like our teachers and administrators are the first ones to say that terrifies them. Unless I'm reading it wrong.
Maddie?
I don't know. I also noticed in the line above where it says and or, it says as much as possible and as appropriate, which I feel allows for consideration of cost prohibitive or other barriers to be considered by the district. you know, I know the word should is in here, but it also says it's urging local school boards to recognize. So I feel like it's directional, but the way it was worded last time, I felt like it was sort of like you shall do this, you shall put this in place, and now I feel like it says we would really like for you to consider these things, and so I have less of a problem with it. I might be willing to vote yes, but depends on what y'all say.
I just wanted to add one thing to that because it says they urge them and recognize that it's imperative.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that is like actually.
The best interests of the students and the community, so that's also subject to interpretation.
Yeah, because I kind of. Oh, sorry.
That's right. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Don't just hit the magic button here. I kind of feel like the pandemic has opened up that in situations, though in person is almost always better, there are going to be times when remote can't. Like, what if the Limestone School had a math class that only they could offer, and could our schools collaborate on something like that or whatever? So I don't have a huge problem with opening the door a little, but because this and/or does give us the discretion, is how I see it.
Bali?
And maybe we could amend so that it reads remote, virtual, or remote and or virtual and or regional collaborators, so that we understand that virtual high school would qualify, for example, as remote learning. That it doesn't have to be synchronous remote learning. I think that's the one that's expensive, that we all get a little taken aback by. But if it's virtual, I think every school has opportunities for virtual learning for their students. Not to exclude remote for those who want to do it, but not to force remote learning onto any district.
So what are we feeling? Is this still a no? Or do you want to propose, would you like to have somebody propose that amendment? Or you can propose the amendment, can't you? Or how does it work? Go ahead. Jill?
Well, it just seems like I volunteered to do that day. So I think I would be proposing the amendment. I'd have to figure out what that process is.
I guess I was thinking back to Maura said that they could be submitted in email in advance. So
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking. If somebody had an amendment that they felt strongly about, Valley, or, you could submit it yourself, or we could talk about that or something too.
Yeah, I think the amendments are meant to be by boards, not by individual board members.
Yeah.
So before the amendment gets proposed by anybody, we probably should vote on it to see if
Okay.
we as a board want to propose that amendment.
Okay, all right. So, how do we feel about this? Anybody else? Do people want to do the amendment, first off?
I'd rather just vote now. But
As in yes or no? Like,
yes.
okay, all right. Let's just vote then. Okay, so with this one, with the changes that are in, who would still like to vote no on this?
May I ask an additional question?
Yes, Susanna.
Sorry. Just thinking about the comment, Jeremy, that you made about MSSM offering a math class, for example. If our students were to take a class like that, does that count as remote or is that virtual?
I will defer to Becky.
I mean,
on that.
only in sort of that type of situation. I'm just curious how that would be classified and whether that would.
Well, currently, we
something
would
here.
consider that virtual.
Right.
So we have virtual through Plato right now. We have virtual through BYU. Those are the two big ones that I think we use. So that
Okay.
would be. But I see why you're asking, because they're pretty synonymous, right?
They could be. And
Right? Although I think when you think about remote learning, that's when you start feeling like it's full-time remote, right? Or that's how I think of it. When I think about virtual, I might be doing that for one class.
Yeah.
But if I'm choosing remote learning, I'm probably choosing remote learning for the entire day.
Okay, no, I was just wondering about some of the examples that we've come up with. Well, what would this qualify? Whether that would be likely identified as remote. So thank you.
Okay, so we'll take who would still be, or who would be in favor of making this a yes? Yes. I think, right? Yes?
As they're proposing.
As this? Yeah. Okay. I don't know what to do. I'm new. Obviously, I don't know what I'm doing up here. Is that?
You're doing a good job, but
There was like two.
and then, I mean, I guess.
Didn't know if we were going to vote on the amendment part of it or something. Like, I don't know. I was doing a yes or no the way it is.
I think you're headed in the right direction. I think, and I want to remind board members, you really only abstain when it should be a very rare time that you're abstaining in a vote. All right, so I'm going to put that as a reminder to the board. All right, and then I think that you're on the right track of just, because it's a straw vote. So are you leaning towards a no or a yes? And I think you should get that. And then if it's a yes, I think you could say, do we want to amend it?
Okay.
I think that's
So,
one way to do it. Would
all
you
right,
agree,
let's
Maura?
start over.
Yeah.
Can we
Okay.
start over?
Yeah.
Okay, Vali, you have something to say? Go ahead,
Yeah,
Vali.
I actually find it easier to know if the amendment is included before I decide for yes or no. Because I would likely vote no unless the virtual word were inserted there. So I will vote no. If we do the amendment after, I already voted no. So to me, it's more helpful to do the amendment first.
Which is how we if it was an official vote, I think that's what we would be doing, correct?
Okay, Maddie?
I'm not opposed to the amendment, but I would like to vote yes without it, because just because we may like the amendment and we may send it in, doesn't mean it will make it in. So so my yes vote is an effort to simplify the process. And like Jeremy said, I feel like the discretion is already built in. I think that adding the word virtual would add more clarity and is a nice to have, but not a need to have.
Then I would say, let's not even consider the amendment.
Just do
Let's just go for the yes or
whether
no.
this is a yes or a no.
And
So you're
then
withdrawing.
forget the amendment.
Okay.
After the vote, we're done.
Oh, all right, Maura.
I just wanted to add, I meant to mention this at the outset, but the board had the question of what is the purpose of resolutions, and I asked that at our regional meeting, and they said they really frame the groundwork for legislative testimony and help identify a platform for MSBA for positions that they take throughout the year with the legislature. So having that context, hopefully that helps folks.
Okay, let's do this again. For this resolution, who is wanting to say no? Please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. Okay. And who would like to say yes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, the yeses have it.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we had no votes on any of the other ones. So unless folks had a specific one they wanted to take a look at, there weren't really any huge substantive changes to the remainder of them. There was some just wording tweaks.
Anybody have anything else? No? All right. Thank you very much, Maura, for that. Appreciate it. And thank you, Jill, for being the representative that's going to go take care of all that. Okay, so now we are back to public comment. Yes, okay.
Yes.
And now there looks like no one here. So, okay, all right. So I would then again take a motion to adjourn. Lindsay, Susanna, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much.